we have 9 o'clock. So will you please rise and give a pledge of allegiance? Senator Fenton, you're closest.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I don't see. Representative Ladd is introducing the first bill, House Bill 365. Did you see where he is?
Want me to introduce it, Madam Chair?
Just waiting for him, giving him another minute, see if he comes in.
Oh, just give him a call.
Okay.
I'd assume they have education today as well.
Yeah, I think he has three
No,
bills.
the House doesn't?
I think he has 3 bills to introduce. Yeah, he has the next one. And the third one, so he
No.
better
So
show
we need
up.
them.
We need him.
We really need them.
Yep.
Who's speaking on 365?
Amy Clark.
Was in yesterday.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Linda Tanner. I'm a representative for Sullivan District 5, the towns of Sunapee and Springfield. And I will introduce Bill 365 relative to statewide facility condition assessments for school buildings. Is that the one? Okay. So just to say about it, there are a lot of school buildings now that are quite old and quite in need of repair. And we've been talking a lot in the education committee about school building aid, and I know we have a new proposal for school building aid this year. So one of the important things is to get an idea of what is out there. And I know in the town of Sunapee, we have an elementary building that is over 100 years old, and it just keeps missing the 2/3 mark for getting a bond passed to redo it. So it's like piecemeal. We have portable classrooms and that sort of thing. We have, and I think in your audience, you have someone from the State Department who's an engineer who has been working with Representative Ladd, I think, on the building aid, and I would defer to her for questions. You're welcome.
Good morning. So for the record, my name is Amy Clark, and I'm with the Department of Education. I'm really here for technical assistance if you have any questions on the bill. This bill is recommending that school districts have in place a long-range capital plan for their school facilities. And so I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Senator Fenton.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for the question. So who's responsible now for kind of looking at capital improvement in their school district?
Each school district would be responsible for looking after their schools for operation, maintenance, long-term capital planning. The Department of Education has a program called School Building Aid, which is a grant program to fund large construction projects. So new builds, full renos, not a roof replacement, not window repairs. These are full rebuilds or full renovation type projects. And in that case, this facility assessment, the original language actually talks about the Department of Education developing a 10-year facility assessment. Funding did not come through last biennium for that, so we'll continue to work on finding resources to complete that. But then this bill is amended to say that school districts shall have those facility assessments to help the Department of Education rank those projects. So to back up, the school building aid is a competitive grant, and so the department is responsible for ranking needs of schools so that we're funding the highest needs school. And this facility assessment would help the department rank those projects.
Sure. Thank you.
Senator Lang.
So I'm assuming it's in the last line, the State Board of Education shall adopt rules is what will require the schools to actually submit this report, because there's nothing in here that says they have to actually submit it to anybody, just that they have to have one.
That's correct.
All right.
I have a question. Is there any criteria right now what the district should be looking for?
For their capital, for their facility assessment?
Yes.
So the industry has a facility condition index. It's a FCI. It's a standard across the nation index. So it covers I can't remember, but like 10 criteria. The building envelope, which is your outside shell of your building, floors, walls, conveyor systems, which in school buildings would be elevators, stairwells, things like that. And so it's pretty industry standard for an engineering company to come through and do a facility condition assessment.
And who in the district will do this?
The district would hire out an engineering firm, most likely, to do that, do this
Okay.
work.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Do you have anything you'd like to add to 365? Well, Representative Tanner introduced the bill, and you just heard Ms. Clark talk about the building aid. And I didn't know if you had anything. Okay. Any others? Things anybody in the audience wants to add to this? If not, we'll close the hearing on House Bill 365, and we'll be back at 9:15, which is in 4 minutes. Thank you. The next one is 466. Water Road D 466.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the Senate Education Committee. For the record, my name is Rick Ladd. I am Chair of House Education, also hail from Haverhill, New Hampshire. This bill is just a bill which has been put forth by the department. It's one where it deals with water bottle filling stations in schools. It changes nothing from last year's bill, which we passed and was signed into law. What it does say, though, is what we put into law is exactly what they put into rulemaking. And it's just like the bills we've had before when we had the fourth year of mathematics, where it was one that was embedded in another course. We didn't need rulemaking there either because it said it quite clearly within law, and that's what they just boom and put that into their processes for schools to follow. So this is just a housekeeping bill in which it doesn't require that we have to establish rules and go through a rulemaking process, which is going to be another half a year when we have the language also already clearly defined within statute. That's what they're just going to ditto into their processes for putting this in effect. I'll be glad to take any questions.
So it's a technical correction.
Absolutely, from the department.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any questions from the members of the committee? Amy Clark, do you have anything to add to that? No. Okay. I think that's pretty much it then. No, we can't until 9:30. I know. And I see that Representative Cordelli is supporting this bill.
We could accept.
Hmm?
We could accept this bill.
Yeah, we could. I'll tell you what we'll do. We're going to go into executive session. We'll have a second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We'll go to executive session and we'll take a look at this bill. Do I have a motion?
466?
466.
Yeah.
I move not to pass on 466.
I have a second and all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Consent?
Move consent.
Second?
We'll take it out.
That's 5-0 consent and Fenton will take it out.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'll just remind you, we have that Greg Hill bill. Remember we talked about it, the OLS made a mistake and forgot to draft the bill for him. We didn't find out that all the closings were done. And we were asked by the House to attach it to some House bill. With the original language, it's about,
Yeah, I remember vaguely.
yeah, so it was a bill, in terms of keeping a bill open that we may want to consider adding it to as a favor to the House. The bill was about, right of first refusal of property, on vacant property for school districts.
Okay, okay.
And the problem was we had passed a law saying that charter schools have a right to first refusal of property no longer being used by public schools, by traditional schools. So we passed it, but the problem was we didn't put any timelines on it. And so it doesn't say that how long the public schools have
Okay.
to either approve or deny
Mhm.
a request by a charter school to, if they make an offer for the building, the school could just sit on it forever and just never act. And so what Representative Hill's bill does is puts a time process around that to say
Okay.
that they must respond to the charter school. What happened was OLS, he had submitted the bill to OLS and it got dropped. Never got entered.
Oh, that's right, yeah, right.
And they didn't catch it until he went to go figure out where the heck's his bill and what's the scheduling date. And even Dave over at, Dave Okonis, the director, I had an email from him saying, this is completely on us. We forgot to write the bill.
Okay,
And so the House asked us if we'd attach it to a House bill and we'd send that.
okay. So we'll
Just
just,
an amendment I can get drafted. I just don't know what bill to get it drafted. for.
Okay.
We want to attach it.
do you want to, we have another, do you want to do the 365,
Sure.
the building aid?
Okay. Well,
Okay, we'll do House Bill 365, has to do with the districts have to provide needs for their buildings. Do I have a motion for that one?
I'll make that motion.
Second?
All to pass, I assume.
yeah.
And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That's 5-0. And
Consent.
consent?
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, that's 5-0.
I'll take it out
And-
if you want me to.
Gender will take it out. Okay, so that's two of them. We can talk about maybe Senator Lang, maybe in caucus, we can talk about a suitable bill for the other one. $65 and $66. 10 minutes.
I know. I feel like we're never waiting around.
I know. You want to come out of executive session?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
That's 4-0, that's fine. So we're out of executive session. House Bill 654. Welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Senate Education Committee. For the record, my name is Rick Ladd. I chair House Education, and I come from Haverhill, New Hampshire. HB 654 is a bill that's a result of the Teacher Shortage Committee, which we have going on in the state right now. And we've identified that there's a number of areas which we have been short on teachers from the get-go here: science, mathematics, special education, and technology. And this is just not a shortage in our regular public schools, but it's also a shortage in the career technical education centers as well. But this bill does not have anything to do with CTE. That's a separate pot, and we'll just deal with what we have here. We have the ability now of a local school board and a superintendent, if they can't find somebody or if they need to have somebody in this classroom, they can do a temporary 1-year teaching certification. And that is done and approved by them. The problem we have with that is that we may have that shortage come up in a school let's say in November. And so 1 year, so it goes November to November. And so at the following November, and the person has his 1-year ticket is in the process of trying to get all their requirements to have the regular certification to be a teacher, let's say, of science in a high school. And they're working on that. They just haven't had time to complete those requirements. There needs to be another year. And we don't want to have to see that person start in November and then have to leave in the following November, finish that year out. And so what it does, it extends the 1-year period to another year, and that year has to be abutting the year in which they had the first year. They can't come back 2 years later and say, I want to have that second year. That's not permissible. It has to be 2 years, 2 consecutive years. They must have a bachelor's degree. They must have a criminal background check. They must have experience or relative experience that's going to be relative to what they're going to be doing in the classroom. Another item which is in this bill is that a teacher that comes in this capacity, even though they've had that authority before, the department has, it requires that they're obligated for the teacher code of ethics and professional conduct. So that was put forth by, requested by NEA and those groups several years back when there was discussion whether it should go to 2. Well, that is in this bill, so it certainly clarifies that. The other point, I'm sure Mr. Appleby behind me can explain that too, but where we initially had the word teacher, there's a number of educators, for example, in the library that have certification, but not necessarily underneath that teacher designation. But this is applicable to them as well. So we put the terminology in route instead of teacher and educator. So in conclusion, this is a bill that's come out and recommended. It's a bipartisan bill. It came out of the Teacher Shortage Committee. It was the only bill which was introduced in the House as late legislation
Could you
after the
hang on a
filing date.
second? Would you please have a seat? There are 4 or 5 empty seats. Thank you very much.
So the bill was introduced as late legislation and approved. Even that body that we have in the House recognized the need for this bill. So it passed the House committee unanimously. It was on consent, and you've got it. So that concludes what I have. I'll be glad to take any questions.
Any questions for
Thank you, Madam
General?
Chair. Thank you, Representative Ladd.
Good morning,
Um,
Senator.
Just a question as far as educator, would that also include like an adjunct college professor that wouldn't necessarily be certified in New Hampshire as a teacher, but an educator?
I'm not going to get into that aspect of it, but Steve Appleby, who's the Director of Certification at DOE, is here, and that's a good question for him.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
See no questions? Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Have a good one.
You too. Megan Tuttle.
Good morning. Megan Tuttle, President, NEA New Hampshire. We represent over 17,000 educators across the state. And while we believe the intent of this bill is really good, we do like the intent, and we do like parts of it. We are here in opposition just because we know we're facing an educator shortage, but we feel there's other ways to help ease that shortage instead of extending this for an additional year. Honestly, to us, the second year is really just putting a body in the classroom. You can have great content knowledge. You can come from other industries. People do it, but it doesn't mean you do know how to teach children or understand teaching children or understand pedagogy or just the, psychology of children. If you are granted that first year of eligibility, which is, amazing, they find they really like it, superintendent, principals, administration thinks that they're a good fit, then we feel they should just be offered, to help them get on a path for the site-based learning plan instead of just getting an additional year of eligibility for it. If we're really looking to help ease that educator shortage, we feel, like I said, there's other ways to do it. Reducing the time of teachers on probation from 5 years back to 3 is going to give New Hampshire an edge over the other states surrounding us. There's Senate bills that we've heard in Senate Education earlier, 3 of them, the stipend of student teachers, student loan forgiveness, mentoring program. We just don't feel this is one of the ways that's really going to help this educator shortage in the long run. So the intent of it's good. We do like that, the code of ethics and professional code of conduct were added in. That's a really good thing. But just putting a body in the classroom for a second year doesn't really seem to us like a way to ease the shortage.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions from the members? Senator Lang?
Don't you think that if the person who was granted this temporary licensure for a year to teach, that if they weren't any good, the school wouldn't use them for the second year? Why would they keep a bad teacher? It's even heading towards getting their certification. So this doesn't mean everybody granted a first year certification automatically gets a second year, does it?
Thank you for the question. I don't believe it does. I don't think it's an automatic and they would have to be accepted or, whatever they wanted to do to say, we want you to come back for the second year. We just feel that if you're going to come back for that second year and if you are a good fit and if it's a path you want to go down, do the site-based learning plan, or what used to be referred to as the ALT4 plan. You're taking the classes, you're doing what you need to do to become a teacher. So yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so your suggestion is rather than doing this, call back the people who have been put on probation. Is that what you said? You said 5 years? Bring them back
Okay,
after
yeah,
3
thank you for
years.
the question. We're saying that another way to help ease the shortage of educators in New Hampshire is to potentially bring the probation back from 5 years to 3. Surrounding states all have 3 years or less. And so we have the most years of probation around us. And so what we're saying is if you're looking at another way to help ease the shortage, attract teachers, retain teachers in New Hampshire, bringing that back. I mean, we've always held the stance that if you don't know if a teacher should be there after 3 years, there's bigger problems and they probably shouldn't be there. We don't think that think 5 years is really too long to be on probation.
So I guess I have a follow-up question. Why would you be put on probation?
There's a lot of different reasons I think that administrators would put them on probation. But the probation I'm speaking of is after the 3 years, you get your initial certificate, you get your second round of certification. And at that point, you've shown through observations, through evaluations, through everything, and administrators, superintendents have signed off that you should be getting your second round of certification. To be on probation another 2 years and not, it's probation versus tenure, which I don't know that tenure is a great word for it in New Hampshire. It has to do more with the due process, why you might be let go without any, not notification, but without any really reason given. If after 3 years, they think you need 2 more years to prove that or not prove it, we just think 3 years is enough to prove that you do what you need to do as a teacher. Your superintendent signed off that you've passed everything you need to do.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have Mr. Appleby.
Good morning, Senator. Steve Appleby, Director of Educator Support and Higher Education at the Department of Education. And I just wanted to share some quick numbers and then answer any questions. This question came up in House Ed. The numbers related to how many of these we issue each year. These emergency authorizations or 1-year certificate of eligibility. For the 2018-2019 season, 85 were issued. Again, this is out of 20 some odd thousand licensed educators currently practicing. The following year, 1920, was 93. The following year was 143. 21-22 was 152. And this year to date, 136. So those are the numbers of one-year certificates of eligibility we've given out to the districts for each year. So out of 20 some odd thousand, it's a pretty small number. So, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for taking my question. Are you in support of this bill or against this bill?
I support anything that's going to help the superintendents run their districts. And I've had a lot of conversations over the years with superintendents who are in a bind. For example, I just had one several weeks ago where a superintendent had brought in a person on a 1 year because they had an educator go out on medical leave. That year was coming to an end. The educator came back. They were going to be done with this person. And then that educator relapsed. And they were going to need a person for another indeterminable amount of time, 6-9 months. But the problem is, under the current system, they can't bring back the same person to be with the kids they've been with. So it seems like a small tweak, but I know that the superintendents that I've spoken to would be very happy.
Follow up? So we just heard testimony. Is this, in your opinion, would this bill cause more harm than good or more good than harm in terms of, it sounds like, you know, if this person isn't up to the task at hand, they may need a babysitter in the classroom, which then is another body, you know, helping that educator.
Thank you for the question. I'm not sure I quite
I
understand
kind
the
of-
question.
I kind
Yeah.
of garbled it. Let me try that again. So, in your opinion, this bill will help the situation of the teacher shortage. But is there a fear? Kind of two questions. I apologize. Is there a fear that this qualified educator may not be up to the task of qualified education?
The person on the 1 year certificate.
Correct.
You know, I guess I would leave it up to the superintendents and principals to make that determination. You know, I think Senator Lang had a great question regarding if the person isn't working out, this doesn't require they keep them. So I think the principal and superintendent know best in their district. So I would defer to them. And again, I've not heard from any superintendent I've spoken to a negative comment about this bill.
Perfect. Thank you.
Senator Lang?
So on those numbers you read out, 85, 93, 143, 152, 136 to date, do you know how many of those went on to get their regular certification teaching credentials so that we see what this do to backfill?
I don't have that information. I could get it and send it along to the committee.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I guess we have no more questions for you, unless you have something else you'd like to add.
No, Senator Gendro, do you have a question earlier?
Yes.
Yes, fine, go ahead.
Yeah, the question was, the term educator, and I had just made a note to myself, could that also include an adjunct college professor that wasn't necessarily New Hampshire certified to teach in the high school or the elementary level, but could work on that too? Certainly educated in a different way, but would that also, because I guess I'm thinking too, what other creative ways can we bring more educators into the classroom?
Right. Okay. Thank you. So I think I don't want to conflate different areas, but when we use the term educator in licensing, it's kind of an umbrella term to refer to all the different licenses that we grant and endorsements. So, you know, educators include teachers. That makes sense. But it also includes, as Representative Ladd mentioned, school librarians. Those are not teachers, right? A teacher, we have a very specific definition for teacher. So a school librarian is a non-instructional specialist in my world. So again, we've had requests, can I get a 1 year certificate for a school librarian because I can't get one? And this is where that comes in. So as far as we don't have any licensing authority over the colleges, they hire whomever. And so if an individual came to us and they had been a college professor and they might actually qualify for a site-based licensing plan and might not even need to do this. This is, very often this is used when there's an illness right, in the districts. They have an emergency situation, someone goes out sick, and as Representative Ladd said, they may go out mid-year, and then now they run out mid-year the following year, and that can become a problem. So,
Good, thank you.
Senator Prentice.
Thank you, Senator Ward. Steve, thanks for being here today. Thanks for following up on these numbers and Senator Lang's question about how many of these actually moved forward. I'm just curious, is there a particular area of teaching that these, like, career and technical education, like, do you break them up, or is it just you give certificates of eligibility? It could be for whatever the local community wants.
yeah. So we don't directly track what endorsement it's for.
Okay.
So
That's-
we could probably look back and try and piece it together, but anecdotally, there's no particular area because they are typically more of an emergency situation. So it's not, most of them are not used to fill shortage. Some are,
Okay.
but many are also for these emergency situations that were not anticipated.
Okay.
Follow up?
But different, I'm going to go down a different road. So I think you were here and you heard Megan Tuttle's testimony about 5 years versus 3 years for probation. Do you have okay, you look.
So
Is that out of your
thank you for
wheelhouse? I'm just
that's not in
trying
my
to-
world.
Okay.
Yeah. So I know that there's some statutory language around, how long teachers are on probation versus not, and that's nothing to do with licensure. So I don't.
Okay, so
We just grant the license. What the districts do for hiring and employment is governed elsewhere.
okay.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's fine. Thank you. No.
Okay. My question is, what kind of preparation does this person have who is now teaching on a 1-year certificate?
So there is the requirement that they hold a bachelor's degree unless
Okay.
it's a CTE center, and then they can have a lesser degree. And really that's, the other piece is the local principal. They're the principal instructional leader of their building. So the expectation is that they're going to mentor this person, or have someone mentor them. But again, that's handled locally.
Okay, so this person has a baccalaureate degree in, they say, English, and they decide they like to try teaching, and they can be hired as a interim teacher or without, you give them a 1-year certificate, and it is expected that after that they will go and finish up or become an educator or a teacher, or is that?
Yeah, sometimes that does happen. I'll pull the numbers for how many actually make that transition. And I suspect it's going to be a decent amount. So.
Okay. Senator Prentice.
Senator Ward, Steve, when you're doing this query, is there the possibility that that we can pull geographic information from that? So I think it's helpful to inform everyone if there is one or more areas of the state that is looking for this type of.
I'll get that as well.
Where this would be more helpful or not. So let's look at the areas of the state as well as how many, on top of how many people make the conversion. So where they come in the door, and then if they make the conversion. Okay.
And I'll see what we have as well for endorsement data.
Yes. That'd be
Another
great.
one?
Thank you.
Okay. Senator Fenton has
Thank you
another
for
question.
taking my question. Sorry. So, line 12C says it's qualified for the vision by relevant experience or education. The principal is determining that, or the administrator is determining what relative? Okay. Follow up. Is there a chance that, they're so desperate for teachers that they might hire someone with maybe not the best relevant experience or education?
Thank you for the question. I think that question really transcends whether or not they even have a license. As I can give you examples with redacted names of individuals with licenses who, I don't think it's unique to this particular type of authorization.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Anybody else who has anything to add to House Bill 554? Seeing none, that closes the hearing on House Bill 654. Now we are up to speed as far as the time goes, so we can go on to the next one. which is House Bill 35. Let's see who's introducing that. Representative Rung is introducing the bill.
Thank you much. Thank you very much, Senator Ward. For the record, my name is Rosemary Rung, and I'm representative for Hillsborough 12, which is the town of Merrimack. Last summer, I was contacted by a constituent of mine who's was entering his freshman year at Merrimack High School, and he asked me to file a bill that would add the National Eating Disorders Helpline to all student IDs. And he felt, he believes strongly that his peers and other youth are at risk, serious risk, because of the rising incidence of eating disorders. So I looked into the issue and I was very alarmed by the numbers and how eating disorders are a major cause of suicide, especially later on as these youth enter into their 20s. So I filed the bill. It passed the House Education Committee and it passed the full House. Some of the concerns that were raised in committee we addressed through an amendment. One was to remove post-secondary education, community colleges and universities. And then the other one was Matthew Brown spoke. He made such an impression that they wanted to name the bill after him. So that was also amended to be retitled. Other concerns were that the National Eating Disorders Helpline isn't a 24/7 helpline. It's available at this, even though the organization is growing because of the increased need. Presently, the helpline's available from 11 a.m. until 9 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and then I think 11 a.m. until 5 p.m. on Fridays. But it's a time when most teenagers would be accessing it. And I don't want us to come forward with a bill that sacrifices good for the perfect. So I don't want perfect to be the enemy of good. So I ask your consideration for this bill. I know that it will help a lot of lives and likely save a lot of lives as well. So I'd be happy to entertain any questions you have.
Senator Gendro.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. The question I have right now, also in some states, they have the Jason Dickey Act, which is the suicide hotline. Will it get to the point where the students' cards are filled with hotlines? So I guess it's kind of a question and a comment that in what has been the positive effect of having the Jason Dickey Act put on their card with a suicide hotline. And would this do the same thing?
Thank you very much for the question. It's a good point, and it was raised in the House hearing. Youth that have eating disorders, we have to put ourselves in their mindset. They don't think they have a mental illness, and they're not at the point of suicide, so they wouldn't relate to that number. But they would recognize, I'm not eating the way other people or normal people would. And also that helpline isn't just for the benefit of the youth, it's also a benefit to their friends and their family who might recognize that there's a problem, but they don't recognize it as they don't name it as a mental health issue. Eating disorders are seen kind of differently. So the present number, the suicide helpline that's on student IDs now isn't something that's going to be relatable to students that have eating disorders, but those eating disorders do manifest themselves over time into serious mental health issues that often result in suicide. There's other people I know that want to speak to this that are much more knowledgeable on it as well.
Any other questions? Senator Prentice.
Good morning, Representative Rung. Thank you for taking my question. So you had said in the House, the bill was amended to take the community colleges off of it?
Yes.
Or not having this as a requirement? Can you just tell me why?
Yeah, no, thank you, Senator Prentice, for that question. Actually, before the bill even went to the committee, I worked with the key stakeholders about it to flesh out what the issues were. And I forget her name, but she's a government relations director, I believe, for the community college system. And she said, we're really concerned because by the time people who suffer from eating disorders reach the college level, it is recognized as a mental illness. And also they have, domestic violence, sexual abuse becomes, or sexual violence becomes more of an issue. They include those helplines on their IDs, but there were some practical considerations too with adding them, because the student IDs at the community college and like university system level are not just used as student IDs. They're also used sort of as a credit card. They're used to charge meals. They're used as key passes, and they're very expensive to produce. So to produce one, just to add this number, was very impractical and very expensive. They recognize that eating disorders are a serious issue. They have specific programs in place to address them. So they felt what they were doing, besides having this on the ID, is addressing the issue with their student population. I hope that answered your question. Okay, thank you.
Senator Lang?
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. So my question is, what information is currently required by law on the back? I think the suicide hotline is already required on the back of a student ID. Do we have a mental health line on there as well for generic mental health that's required?
Thank you for the question, Senator Lang. To my knowledge, only the suicide hotline is available, and I believe the House passed that last term.
Thank you.
Senator Fenton?
Thank you, Representative. Sorry to keep you up here. Does every school give out ID cards, or is it just specific schools?
Thank you for the question, Senator Fenton. I don't have an answer to that. To my knowledge, most middle and high schools, both public and private, do provide student IDs. I am assuming, and you know what that word is, but I am assuming not all of them do. I would assume maybe some small private schools don't issue student IDs, but to my knowledge, all of the public and most of the private schools, at least in my district, do have them.
Senator Gendro?
Thank you. Thank you again for taking my question.
Thank you.
Where are the parents in this? Would the students be encouraged to, we've heard a lot of bills on parental bill of rights, and, a person isn't obese or underweight because they eat too much or eat too little. There's definitely a core issue there. And how involved are they, or how much of an encouragement is there to say, please let your parents know that you're going to be calling this hotline? I guess I'm just envisioning, the student calling the hotline, parents have no idea.
Thank you very much, Senator, for that question. I can only answer as a parent. I've raised 3 children. I've survived raising 3 teenagers. And there were many issues where my children came to me and said, Mom, I need some help. They still do. In their 20s and 30s, they still, Mom, I need your help with something. But there are some issues that they didn't want me to get involved with. There were some things, there was, underage party attendance. They didn't tell me they were going there. Things that they thought that would disappoint me, or that they would be ashamed of if I knew, they kept from me. It doesn't, I hope it doesn't mean I was a bad parent. I mean, they're all off the payroll. They're all successful. I'm a grandmother. I mean, all's good. But I don't know if there's such a thing as a perfect parent. And in my history, there were times when I was so grateful for the parents of my children's friends and my neighbors, that they would look out for them when I couldn't or they didn't want me to. So I don't really see this as parents have to be involved. In fact, one of the comments that came, I believe, from another constituent about this is going to be a real help for parents, because a lot of times they have concerns. Their children don't want to discuss it. They don't want that to be considered a problem, because they have this body dysphoria and they think they're improving themselves. They don't want anyone to get in the way of that, even their parents. But having this helpline will help parents. It will give them a way that they can reach out to get advice, because the National Eating Disorders Association also provides guidance and counsel for friends and family to equip them with skills to intervene in a situation like that. Yeah.
What's that? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
if you're here to testify on this bill, you may sit here, but if you're waiting for the next one, I have to ask that you move outside because we can't have people standing in the room. So I will call on Hope Damon.
Thank you, Madam Chair, my senator, and thank you to the committee. I am Representative Hope Damon. I serve Sullivan District 8, 9 towns in beautiful Sullivan County. I'm in my first term as a state rep on House Education Committee, so have participated in this bill there. I'm also a recently retired dietitian diabetes educator. I spent my 43-year career mostly in private practice. About a third of my patients over those decades were people with eating disorders. So I'm here vigorously supporting this bill and hopefully to be a resource for a little bit better understanding of eating disorders and why it would be worthwhile and appropriate to put this number on the ID cards. I consulted for Proctor Academy, Colby-Sawyer College, and all of the local public high schools in my area. I live in Croydon. There were, I never kept statistics, thousands of people with eating disorders over the years. Eating disorders are intense, complex, heart-wrenching, life-threatening illnesses. There's nothing subtle about them, except the way that they might hide. A person can have an eating disorder invisibly. 1 in 10 people in the US will experience an eating disorder in their lifetime. So I did a little head count in here as people were coming and going, and this morning in the last half an hour or so that I've been here, we've probably had 2 or 3 people experiencing or have experienced eating disorders amongst us today. And there wasn't anybody that I looked at, and even with a career background and expertise, that I would go, oh, that person has an eating disorder or that one. Very, very often you can't tell. Eating disorders are non-discriminatory. They affect people of all shapes, all sizes, men, women, people of all ages, all ethnicities. The most common age of onset is in the teen years and the early 20s, but they can develop at any point in life. They don't care if you're rich or poor. There is likely a genetic component, and that is one of the pieces in terms of putting this ID number on cards, or this helpline number, sorry. I would anticipate that a parent might notice this number, and if they themselves are experiencing eating disorder issues, it might increase their attention to what's happening with their teen and or getting help themselves. I can tell you there were times that I sat in my office with a parent present with their young person, and in doing my assessment, said to myself and noted, there are 2 patients in this room, and only one of them has been diagnosed, and that's a pretty serious situation. We live in a culture with an intense focus on what we look like. Dieting is normalized, maybe even revered. Fat phobia is intense. Children begin to have a distorted body image when they're as young as 7 years old. There was actually a research study done, I want to say in the early or mid-90s, that showed kindergarten children photos of people with a variety of different physical conditions, some would say disabilities. One of those people was extremely obese. And they asked the children to make statements about these people and who would they like to be like or be concerned about. The obese person was the person who was most judged by those kindergarten kids as someone they would not want to be. So our values around what we look like in size are established at an awfully early age. Eating disorders are life-threatening. Anorexia is the #1 psychiatric cause of death. They very commonly co-occur with mental health issues, including anxiety, depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, attention deficit disorder, bipolar also. People with eating disorders are at risk of severe cardiac complications, not only because of weight loss, but because of electrolyte imbalances. So you could be a normal weight person with bulimia, and a very common cause of harm or potential death is a heart attack. You could be 17 years old. Eating disorders impact quality of life. They reduce productivity, they delay social and emotional development, and they impair cognition. And aside from my written notes, which I'll of course share with you, driving down from Croydon this morning, I was listening to Vermont Public Radio. It comes in better than Concord for the first part of the drive. And they were interviewing the top 2 mental health professionals in Vermont about eating disorders. I thought how fortuitous that this is on now, and their recently released report on what Vermont, and I think we parallel the situation in many ways, they're not diagnosing adequately. They want to work to help with recognition of eating disorders and better treatment. I think it's a very interesting report. So to not take too much time, the better news is eating disorders are treatable. And the most important piece I would emphasize with that is that early diagnosis greatly increases the likelihood of a full recovery. The brain changes the longer that eating disorders persist. Without getting into the physiology deeply, the concept of neuroplasticity, the way the brain is wired, is altered by our behaviors and by our nutrition. So the sooner that we help a young person to get help and change what they're doing and how they take care of themselves, the greater likelihood that this will not be a lifetime problem. It is hard for sufferers to ask for help. I think one of the things that will be common if we prevail with putting this number on ID cards is that students who don't have an eating disorder will call on behalf of their friend who does and find out how to help and how to speak with them. The language to address eating disorders is different and particular because people with eating disorders hear remarks differently than folks who don't have eating disorders. If you say to a person with a healthy mindset about their well-being in their body, "You've lost some weight, you look great," they don't take that in an adverse way. If you say that to a person with an eating disorder, they think they need to lose more weight. There are many examples, and so in answer to the query about does it make sense to have this number as well as the mental health or suicide hotline number? Very much so, yes. Because the people on the other end of this helpline are trained in the language of eating disorders and will respond accordingly, not in a way that would unintentionally be harmful to that person. Let's see. I do want to acknowledge that there is much more we need to do to access eating disorders treatment. New Hampshire has exactly one eating disorders treatment facility. It's here in Concord. It's an outpatient program at a variety of different levels. They're very capable folks. They do good work, but that is not an adequate level of access to care. However, if we connect with people with eating disorders early on, they can successfully be treated in their communities by a team, dietitian, mental health provider, physician or nurse practitioner, sometimes a psychiatrist and medication. So this is about getting access to that care as soon as possible. When the bill passed the House OTP on the consent calendar, I'm going to do it now. I have to tell you, I got teary and I looked at my seatmates and said, we just moved to save some lives. I hope you folks can do that as well. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Senator Prentice.
Thank you, Senator Ward. Good morning, Representative
Good
Daly.
morning.
Good to see you. Drove through your neighborhood this morning on my way here, but I wasn't listening to NPR or Vermont Public Radio, even though I do live closer to Vermont. I was I don't know, singing show tunes probably. So first of all, the
Excellent idea.
yes, I know, it lightens my day. So just for clarification, I think for everybody, we did pass the Dickey Act last year. If there's any uncertainty around that, and interestingly, it just took, I mean, it was signed in August, so I just wanted to point that out. But it talks in here, and actually this is probably more for Representative Rung, but I do have a question for you about that this covers, the Dickey Act covers public schools, private schools, charter schools, and private universities and colleges. And I know we hit the community college piece, so that's, I understand why that's been eliminated, but I want to make sure that if this were to move forward, that we covered the private schools and the charter schools, and we took a broad approach to that. And then more so for you, you may have said this, Representative Damon, but what's our, in talking about the numbers of Granite Staters, men or women, that are impacted by eating disorders, do we have a particular age group that is more prevalent? Is it our school age?
So eating disorders are definitely more prevalent in New Hampshire and nationally and internationally in people in their teens through the mid-20s. After that, what happens is either people have learned how to exist with their eating disorder. They're not necessarily well, but they're not in an acute crisis either. So they might be putting a lot of time and energy and attention into how they consume or don't consume food or other behaviors, but they can still be functional. It's not ideal. Sorry, lost my train of thought. But predominantly, I'm always cautious when I say this. In the course of my career, we in this profession went from largely thinking that eating disorders were in fact an issue of adolescence and early 20s to recognizing that there is a large population of middle-aged and postmenopausal women, middle-aged men and women, who either develop eating disorders at that time that they never had before, or relapse from a teenage adolescent eating disorder that was treated but they didn't stay well indefinitely. So identifying the ages that are at risk, I don't think the research data is complete yet. Your first question, Senator Prentice, charter schools are included.
Oh, yeah,
The bill
okay.
does not specify private schools.
Wait.
I wish it did.
Well, we could probably make that change. Can I just do a quick follow-up before Senator Gendro?
On what?
Can I do a quick follow-up?
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Senator Wood. Hang on just a second. Thank you, Representative Damon. So part of what I'm hearing from you is that this is, ooh, hey, Siri says it's no problem. I can follow up. We'll let
to know.
Siri start running these meetings.
Good to know.
Oh, my Lord. So what I'm hearing from you is that there's a prevalence in the younger, in our youth, okay? But that this also could potentially be a preventative measure for those who might have an issue, that it might prevent this from reoccurring if there's earlier recognition and treatment.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
And
Oh, sorry.
if I could addenda, I neglected to say that I think the fact that this bill comes before us because a freshman in high school saw the need speaks to the prevalence of the issues in the high school population.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Senator Gendro.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Hope, for taking my question. The question I would have, so somebody calls and says, you know, I feel like I have a real problem, let's say overeating, and then come to find out in asking questions with this phone number, they find out that this person has been sexually molested, and there's a root cause to it. Is there now a referral system? So somebody on the other end of that eating disorder line could now say, I want to refer you to so-and-so, or some sort of follow-up. And the reason why I say that, I have a very dear friend that when she was in high school, she's 46 now, but when she was in high school, she was 95 pounds. She had to be weighed every single day. So there was an eating disorder. She is now close to 200 pounds. And it's the food is keeping her secure. And it was because she was sexually molested. It was never dealt with. So I guess I'm, and that may be an extreme, I don't know, but I don't think it's just as clear cut as saying I eat too much or I don't eat enough.
Thank you for your thoughtful and very valid question, Senator Gendro. And I wish I could say that that kind of situation you just described with your friend was unusual. It's actually not. The helpline is intended and I think does function as an entry point to treatment. They are not going to do a comprehensive evaluation in this call of the probably many factors leading to someone's eating disorder, whether a sexual assault trauma or child abuse or any number of other variables. Their whole intent is to help that person be able to get referred for care. And any person practicing in the eating disorders field effectively would in fact be looking for helping that patient recognize what are the drivers of this, because as you wisely note, it's not by any means as simple as are you eating enough or are you eating more than your body requires? Quite frankly, that's the easy part, because that's pretty factual. You can help somebody understand, they may not be convinced, but you can help them lay out a good, adequate way for them to feed themselves. Being able to act on that is the therapy and the work. There's always a therapist on an eating disorder treatment team. I will say that that was one of the challenges in my career. There aren't enough therapists, period. And there aren't enough therapists who enjoy and are comfortable treating people with eating disorders. That's pretty scary work. Editorial comment.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Oh, did you have one? Okay, Senator Lang.
So are the people on the other end of this national eating disorder hotline, a helpline, nutritionists, or are they mental health counselors?
Trained volunteers, and they're trained by therapists.
Follow up. Okay. So again, when you say trained by therapists, mental health therapists, or
Yes.
people who do, again, nutrition.
They're trained by people who specialize in eating disorders. So, and I think it is reasonable. I don't have any data on this, but my understanding of the helpline operation, there are many times people with lived experience, either as a family member or a person who's recovered from an eating disorder. But they are trained by mental health therapists in the language. But honestly, the questions that someone calling is going to ask or the situations they're going to present are not that varied. Even though everybody is an individual, the basic parameters are the same. So as long as those people are skillful and kind in responding respectfully to the people who call and have their directory of someone called from New Hampshire. Okay, where do we refer people in New Hampshire? What are the resources? I think they are very capable.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you
very much.
Matthew Brown.
Thank you, Senator Ward. Senators, my name is Matthew Brown. I'm a freshman at Merrimack High School and the originator for the idea for House Bill 35. As I continue, I'd like to point out that every 62 minutes, someone with an eating disorder will die. I believe that that is why we're here today. The prevalence and the fact that eating disorders are all too common in the United States and specifically in New Hampshire. Now, I'd like to echo remarks of Representative Rung that this is not a 24/7 helpline. I believe, though, that eating disorders are very unique and very dangerous. I am proud that the Jason Dickey Act was passed, and I am happy that there is a resource for people with mental health to contact. I believe, though, as a teenager myself, that it is far different to realize you have an eating disorder than a mental illness. It is a much more different process to receive treatment, and it is much more dangerous. I believe that having a specific hotline for eating disorders will allow those with an eating disorder to recognize the issue and to seek help. In my experience, I think that the helpline is very helpful. It was helpful for me when I contacted them. And I agree that the research there shows that teenagers are all too likely to suffer from an eating disorder and unfortunately likely to consider suicide. Those with anorexia are up to 40% likely to have depression. Up to 50% of people with bulimia will have depression, and at least 33% of those with binge eating disorder will have depression. If we're able to solve the root cause of these feelings, then we'll be able to have a much quicker recovery process and much better resourcefully. I also think that, unfortunately, in the United States, actually in the whole world, there is still a large stigma against mental illness, and that can lead to people feeling isolated. That's why I think it's important to allow a resource that is private for teens. You know, as teens, it's a difficult process. You're growing up. It's important to allow teens to find help in the best way possible, the most comforting way possible. And sometimes that is reaching out to a parent or a guardian or a close friend, or sometimes that is reaching out to the eating disorders helpline. I think that even though this obviously the organization is not perfect, I think that saving at least one life will make this bill worth it. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the members?
Just a comment.
Okay.
Thank you for being here this morning, especially as the one that approached your representative to share in person and testify. You are a very wise young man.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
I have a comment. That has to be a reason for why body image is so important and why you are sort of coerced to achieve something that may not be what you want. So how about looking at the media or Hollywood ads on what a beautiful body is like?
Thank you, Senator. I agree that there is still a large stigma on body issues, but I think what I'm happy about this bill is that it's a stepping stone. We can't solve that whole problem just by legislating. I believe that this will open up the door to get more positive change, and it will take a long time. I don't think there's going to be one solution, but I think this bill will have the impact that it needs to change the culture around body image.
And how are you going to do that to change the culture around body image?
Well, I think that's a long process. I think by allowing an eating disorders helpline to be on IDs, by allowing teens and parents to see that and to recognize that we as a government, we as the state, are acknowledging that there are significant issues with eating and body issues, I think that will allow people to recognize that. I don't think we can change the culture in Hollywood by one day. I think it's a long process, and I think that is achieved by passing efforts like this, just to simply give the recognition to this important issue that the issue deserves.
Okay, thank you. Emma Svingje.
Hello, and thank you for having us here to speak on such an important issue. My name is Emma Savini. I am the Children's Behavioral Health Policy Coordinator at New Futures. New Futures is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that advocates, educates, and collaborates for the health and well-being of all Granite Staters. We are here to support for House Bill 35 today because it was connect Granite State youth to a mental health resource at a time when mental health challenges are all too prevalent in their lives. I won't go into detail because you've heard a lot of statistics, great information from the other speakers. I'll just underscore that the children in schools today are facing increased stigma for body image issues. They're facing increased mental health challenges. The Youth Risk Behavior Survey data just came out for 2021, and that shows increases in mental health concerns, students who are contemplating suicide or even attempting suicide. All of those statistics are really concerning. And so anything we can do to help link them up with resources that could help improve outcomes, improve their chances of reaching out to somebody, I think is a good step in the right direction. The National Eating Disorders Hotline gives the option for text, chat, or calls, which makes it really accessible for students to call or chat or text when they're in the midst of a crisis. And having it on the back of their student ID cards, which is a readily accessible tool for them, will only increase their chances of reaching out for support when they need it. For those reasons, we ask that you vote House Bill 35 ought to pass. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions from the members? I just have a comment.
Yeah.
I do clothing shopping in a particular store. And when I go into that little room, there are little tiny things. You are perfect the way you are. And I think that does an awful lot for, I think a lot of women have issues with body image.
Absolutely.
And we always feel less than perfect, but to see those little things pasted all over the place, telling me that whoever I am is perfectly fine. So thank
Yeah,
you.
I'm glad you've had that experience.
Holly Stevens. Welcome.
Thank you, Senator Ward, members of the committee. My name is Holly Stevens. I'm the Director of Public Policy for NAMI New Hampshire. NAMI New Hampshire is a nonprofit grassroots organization whose mission is to improve the lives of all people impacted by mental illness and suicide through education, advocacy, and support. I am here today to testify in support of House Bill 35, which would require adding the National Eating Disorder Helpline on the back of student ID cards. We also supported your bill last year, Senator Ward, on the Jason Dickey Act. And we believe that, I know that, in the House, there were questions, are we going to have to start listing the helplines or the hotlines for every single disorder on the back of a student ID card? And I think the answer to that is no. I mean, I think that when you're looking at these situations, you have to take them one at a time. And as you've heard today, eating disorders are much different than other mental illnesses. And that's why we think it's so important that this is included on the student ID cards. I've included an infographic with a lot of data and a lot of resources that I'm not going to go into here today, knowing that you're behind schedule and you can read that yourselves. And I've seen varying statistics on, suicidality and eating disorders and the comorbidities of those. And again, they're varying statistics, and I think they're still doing that research to figure out, but we do know that there is a heightened correlation of suicide and eating disorders. There's no getting around that. There's a higher prevalence of suicide attempts, suicide contemplation, as well as death by suicide with folks with eating disorders, which is why this is such an important issue. And I will just leave it at that and ask that you vote ought to pass on House Bill 35.
Thank you. Senator Gendro.
Thank you, Senator Ward, and thank you for taking my question. So when the students are given their ID card, it'll have the numbers on the back. Will they have any form of education? So will they be told, or some sort of pamphlet that says, you have 2 numbers on your card? if this passes, you'll have two numbers on your card. One is a suicide hotline, the other is an eating disorder hotline. And just kind of educate them on that to say, if you feel like you have an eating disorder, you're free to call this number. Or will they just be handed the card and we just got to leave it up to them to come up with what it's for?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I don't believe there is any pamphlet or education around it. I think Matthew might be able to speak to that better than I, knowing that he probably now has the suicide hotline on the back of his card. But one of the things that, I was in the room when Matthew testified in the House, and one of the things that he touched on there that he didn't touch on today was how difficult it was for him to find this helpline, that he researched it, that he went online and he was eventually able to find it. And so I think that if a freshman in high school can go through the trouble of accessing that online and finding it, that if they turn over their student ID card and see, National Eating Disorder Helpline, that they can put two and two together and know that that's a resource for them to be able to reach out to if either they themselves or somebody that they know and care about have symptoms of an eating disorder.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. Oh, do you have one? Senator Lang?
Thank you. Would you agree that the eating disorders generally have an underlying component of mental health? That's a problem.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do we have anybody else who did not sign up who likes to speak? Representative Tanner.
Thank you. I missed that check mark when I signed up on the paper. I'm Linda Tanner, Representative Linda Tanner, Sullivan 5, the towns of Sunapee and Springfield. And this topic is near and dear to me. I taught for 35 years. I coached girls' sports. I was the health education teacher. And you've had some really wonderful testimony. I just want to assure you that it is a major problem, particularly in the high school level or with teen girls. And I think after COVID, we know that teen girls suffered the most mental distress from the being isolated and with the COVID epidemic. There's a couple of things I just wanted to address. One was not only body image is a problem with this, but also food advertising and the place that food is in our society and on TV and everything else. So I think if you're going to do a culture change, Senator Ward, you need to do a food advertising change as well. I also want to speak to the issue that came up quite a bit in the House about, these cards. Let's talk about the cards. After Columbine and after the school shootings and with security, I would believe that all public schools have ID cards and most other schools do. I think it's just a measure of security as well as identification for the student. On the back of the card, the suicide hotline is actually a crisis line that is for an immediate crisis. Someone is suicidal, that at the end of a depression, they may be depressed, they may be thinking about suicide for a long time, and then they get to the point where they have that crisis point, and that's where that card, that's where that line comes in handy. The eating disorders hotline, you've heard that eating disorders need a whole different type of language. As a teacher, as a coach, I dealt with a number of young women who were suffering from eating disorders and had to really educate myself. And the parents were very supportive of the schools, and back and forth, we worked together. And that's how it should be. Parents and school people should work together for the best of the student. And the last thing, I guess, is the question about education with the cards. Certainly when we have health education as a function of our school, as one of the minimum standards of our school. I taught a 9-week course in health education at 9th grade level. It's also taught earlier than that. And most schools have a school nurse who is also very informed about eating disorders and other mental issues with teenagers. And they put up stickers all over the place. If you have a school nurse, they have a bulletin board, they have all kinds of things. So there is education that's going on. People in schools recognize that this is an issue. And so it isn't just a card. It is a very isolating disease. It is a very secretive disease. Most people that think about it, or they want to try bulimia a little bit, you know, they hear about it, or they feel bad about their body image, and they're just kind of experimenting with what they can do. Maybe if they do this, I will be attractive to more boys, or if I do this, maybe I'll be a better student. And so it's this hotline, I feel, is really important so that it gets in at the beginning where they have questions, and it can be life-changing, particularly if you, as Representative Damon said, if you catch it early, the earlier the better, and the more information they have, the better. And the last thing, I guess, for Senator Lang is that, yes, this is a mental health condition of its own. It's a diagnosis of its own. And just like bipolar disorder or many other disorders, mental disorders, they're not isolated. They're often combined with other things. It doesn't mean that somebody has to have a mental disorder to get an eating disorder. Like I said, oftentimes there's this feeling of experimentation. And also, as Representative Damon expressed, it does damage to the brain. It actually changes the brain. I was amazed. I coached tennis, and I had a young woman who had an eating disorder very severely, and the parents knew it. We had been working together. One of the things in high school tennis is there's no referees. The players actually call the lines on their side, which is so different from any other sport that's out there, really. And she was making bad line calls, and the other coach came over to me and said, you know, your tennis player is really making bad line calls. And I knew from working with this youngster that she wasn't doing it on purpose. And you could tell because it wasn't at critical points. I mean, if you're going to cheat, why not cheat at the most important points, right? And so I had a little talk with her, and she couldn't judge and make a decision on line calls. And part of that was the fact that her eating disorder and the fact that she was exercising and probably didn't have enough nourishment on board, even though, you know, we tried all we could do. But that's how it changes brain function. And it changes their brain function as how they can deal with this, with culture, with eating, with other people, with their schoolwork. It's really a debilitating disease once it gets going. So I strongly encourage that you support this number on the back of the ID, and I think that schools will get the idea, just like they did with the suicide issue, that it needs to be addressed in schools as well. So thank you. Any questions you might have?
Any questions? Thank you
Thanks.
very much. Do we have anybody else who did not check off that they want to speak? If not, this closes the hearing on HB 35. Our next bill is HB 501. And Representative Murphy is going to introduce the bill. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairwoman Ward, honorable members of the committee. I'm Nancy Murphy, here representing Hillsborough 12, the town of Merrimack. I'm here this morning to introduce HB 501 relative to the Ages for Special Education. This bill is a housekeeping bill in the truest sense of the word. Its intent is just merely to make technical corrections to sections of RSA that were inadvertently overlooked and remain unchanged when HB 1513 was passed last term. HB 1513 matched the previous HB 1558 that I sponsored in 2020 and passed the House Education Committee 20-0. HB 1513 brought RSA 186C special education into compliance under current federal law. It amended the definition of a child with disability to match both the federal statute and federal regulations. HB 1513 did not raise the age limit of a student entitled to a free and appropriate education. It merely corrected the ambiguity of RSA 186C in order to bring New Hampshire statute into conformity with federal law. There are 8 places in RSA that were mistakenly overlooked that need to be amended just for consistency. And HB 501 is meant to correct that. And they are found in the bill before you. Thank you for your time and consideration, and I'd be happy to take questions. And I understand too, the Department of Education is here as well. Thank you.
Questions? Senator Lang.
So just to be clear, this just puts special education on parity with like other kids, right? So in schools now, we don't throw 19-year-olds out just because I said in schools now, we don't throw 19-year-olds out if they haven't graduated yet. We allow them to stay in school until they're 21 and get all the needed services they're supposed to. And this bill brings those special education services along with the children all the way to the age 21.
Well, actually, this bill does not. That bill already passed. This bill is just correcting a few places where it wasn't, the statute wasn't changed in all the sections of the law. So it was just a few oversights, and instead of, it should say like 21 inclusive, rather than, and it does in most of the places, but I think there were 8 sections where that word was left out.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? I have one. The
Sure.
thing that caught my eye when I read this bill on line 3. Provide on a weekly basis a list of incarcerated inmates up to the age of 21 inclusive who are eligible to receive special education. Is this for the young people in prison? Or are you planning this applies to all the people with special needs?
Thank you for your question. Actually, that line, other than the word inclusive, that is already in current statute. It's all this will do is will ensure that students who are eligible to currently receiving those special ed students who are currently receiving supports and services will still be eligible when they turn 21. It'll be up to the age of 22. So it's not really changing anything about including incarcerated inmates. That's already current law. It's just making sure that that the age is consistent with supports and services.
Yeah, so you're eligible to the day before your 22nd birthday?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Christopher Bond. Morning.
Good morning. For the record, Christopher Bond, Senior Assistant Attorney General from the New Hampshire Department of Justice. I wanted to come over to answer any questions you might have and to clarify that in the opinion of the Attorney General, this change is necessary to be compliant with federal law. We testified last year for the original bill, and I agree with the previous testimony that this is really a cleanup and clarification, making that age change in other parts of the statute to make it consistent with what happened last year. But the underlying change that was accomplished by the bill last year and that will be fully effectuated by this change is required by federal law in the opinion of the Attorney General. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Bonnie Dunham. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Dunham. I'm a parent from Merrimack, New Hampshire, and I'm supporting this bill. And first, I was so excited last year when House Bill 1513 was signed into law, extending the age of special education up to the age of 22 by changing that definition of a child with a disability to align with what's in the federal law. And that was clearly the intent of that bill. But because of the oversight of those additional sections that did not consistently change to 22 or 21 inclusive, it leaves some ambiguity. It leaves room for confusion. And one of the things that I think we're really good at in New Hampshire is trying to be clear, crystal clear, so that when people read it, everybody sees the same thing. And so I'm just asking for you to support this bill so that we can continue that long and fine tradition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
Oops.
Seeing none, thank you. Karen Rosenberg.
Good morning. I'm Karen Rosenberg. I'm the Policy Director at the Disability Rights Center of New Hampshire, also here to support HB 501. Like previous people have testified, this is actually a cleanup bill. Last session is when you all did your work to make sure that our law aligns with federal law. I think I've sort of heard through the grapevine that you might receive some other information from folks about, suggesting that this might be an unconstitutional mandate, unfunded mandate. It's not. This is clearly something that's required by federal law, as you heard from the Attorney General's office. It aligns with federal law, or that somehow when HB 1513 was passed last year, that the intent wasn't to actually do what it said it was going to do, provide services for students who are older who really need them. So I think you all know what the intention was, and I'm hoping that you will support this bill so that all of our laws will make sense and be consistent. Thank you.
It's amazing how sometimes you miss something when you rewrite a bill.
Last session was my first session as Disability Rights Center's policy director, and I was just beating up myself thinking, rookie mistake. But I guess I'm in good company since a bunch of people made it. So anyway, we can all be forgiving of ourselves and make the correction.
I'm glad that somebody reads it carefully and picks it up.
Yes. Well, now we'll have confidence to know that hopefully this time everyone did it correctly and no more rookie mistakes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions? No questions. I think that completes the hearing on House Bill 501, unless there's somebody in the audience who did not check off that they want to speak. Seeing none, that concludes the hearing. Thank you very much for coming. The whole. Oh. It's 11:15. Do you want to go into executive session?
Yeah.
No,
May just want to save one.
I like cleanup bills.
May I just want to save.
Yeah, we have a couple of.
think we all agree, as by some of the bills we passed this year, that mental health is an issue in our students.
I thought both numbers were going to go on there.
So the
That's what
suicide
I'm talking-
hotline number, which is at the one. Sorry. So there's a suicide hotline number on the back of the card now. That's the only
Right.
thing that's on the back of the
Right.
cards by statute. And that was passed before New Hampshire decided to go to this 3-digit 988 number, right? So that was done 2 years ago, finally brought forward.
I think we
Um,
were aware of that 3-digit number.
Yeah. So,
Now,
so
what
that's,
you
I
said,
just, I'm a little
It's
nervous with the
changed.
idea. Yeah. I'm
Go
just, go ahead.
No,
Nope.
you go ahead.
So I just, for me, I'd rather look at the bigger picture
Mhm.
and say that we all recognize there's a mental health issue. I'm a little concerned that we have trained
Volunteers.
private citizens on mental health. I looked up their website, the National Eating Disorder Association. Those are, as was said, they're not mental health professionals. Somebody who is trained by mental health professionals, whereas the 988 number that we have in state is staffed by trained mental health professionals. So I'd rather see, if we're going to put something on the back of a kid's card to help them with mental health, I'd like it to be more encompassing, to include substance abuse and include, mental health issues.
Right.
So.
Well, the thing is, people talk, they get very emotional about it, and it
Right.
just sounds like it's, something that you have to do, I still think that the root cause, there may be an underlying mental instability, but I think that our culture is doing so much to damage the image of people. When I'm looking at the television ads, Go Low, nutrition counseling, all kinds of things. This is what I look like, and now I'm here. And it's just like, that's the beauty. And it's just, something needs to be done with the whole thing. And the same thing what Linda said about food. You have these all food ads, what you should do, what you should eat, and everything concentrates on, so you have the perfect body and the perfect strength and the perfect whatever. And I think we're just bombarded with it all the time. And some people are more susceptible to ads, and lacking in self-image, self-confidence are much more likely to fall for some of those things. So I'm fine holding off on that.
Again, I just want to have have that conversation, the bigger conversation about mental health. Remember, we added adequacy into the definition of adequate education, mental health, a mental health class.
Right, and certainly this is something that could be included in the lectures. Yes, Susan?
Thank you, Senator Wharton. Well, and one of the things I know we heard about from Representative Tanner is that they're already teaching about, eating disorders and body image in high school. She talked about teaching a 9-week class.
Right.
Maybe that wasn't exactly, but it's part of health education. So there's a recognition that this is an issue. And before the 3-digit number, first we had the 3-digit number just came into effect nationally within the last year, only because I have a banner. I have a banner on my on the American Trauma Society's website that actually directs people there once that was turned on. So this is great. But I want to find out, because first of all, I think it was very brave for the young man to come forward. I think the House really considered this and did a good job with it. I think that we have to look at pairing this up with the mental, what's on the cards for mental health if we go forward. I just think we should make this easier rather than harder to get help when you need it. But the question is, who is on the other end of the line, and is there a better organization? And we have an opportunity to capture an audience of youth that are struggling with this and prevent something from happening further down the road. So you go in through that door and they take you to where you need to go. I think if we send folks just to the 3-digit, it's almost like it feels like almost, I don't want to use this, I'm not exactly sure what the right phrase is, because I can appreciate like just having one number, but I'm not sure that we're going to get what we need for this population of children with just that number. So if they go through, then whatever hotline number, if we establish one is the best place to go, and we capture this and make it available to these kids, then they're going through that door and they're just continuing to move forward rather than going someplace where someone says, you know what, I can help you, but not exactly, so I'm going to take you over here. I don't know. I just feel like let's help them continue to move forward. That's my opinion, Senator Lang. So,
I would agree. A lot with what Senator Lang said and what Senator Prentice said. you know, we saw this a lot in transportation was people kept wanting to add things to the back of a driver's license. Where does it stop? You know, this is an important issue. It's immensely important. I think we all know that students deal with eating disorders. You know, I think from the perspective of, you know, who's on that other end of the line, I just looked up, you know, is poison control doctors? They're not doctors. When you call poison control, they're poison specialists. Just like we call this eating disorder, you know, it's not necessarily doctors or mental health experts. It's trained volunteers. I think that's a lot of these numbers that we're calling. And I also want to echo, you know, is there that one catch-all number we can get? And is the suicide prevention hotline, or what is it? Because, you know, where does it stop with what we're putting on these IDs and, like you said, bouncing them around? There's so much merit in this bill, like you said, from the House. There's like such an important issue, but you know, are we going to hear in 2 years' time another number that needs to be added? And what, you know, I don't have an answer.
Yeah, I was thinking, how much should we put on the back of that car? Can they actually find the number?
With the phone book on the back side of the car, right? The print is this small, so you gotta be a 0.9 font to get this. So they add all the numbers, so. What's it? So again, I'm looking at a little bit bigger and just saying, like, we have substance abuse issues in our schools. We have a lot of mental, and a lot of that, again, has an underlying issue of mental health. And so by calling out this one, again, we're going to come back and, okay, now we're going to add a substance abuse number. Now we're going to add it. Now we're going to add. Now we're going to add. I think we can capture it all by using the 988 number and sending them there and let them, to the woman from NAMI, right, who said that there's an underlying mental health issue in an eating disorder, in whether it's anxiety, whether it's a body image, a self-worth issue, right? That's the underlying issue. So if we can get them to a mental health professional, whether it's because it's suicide or substance abuse or eating disorder or any, you know, they're victim of sexual assault, right? And you never know what that underlying issue, to Senator Genro's point, is. I think we're better off capturing it at a higher level, get them to where they need to go rather than focus them on, I have an eating disorder, so I'm going to go here, but I find out it's because I have anxiety or depression or anything else that's, you know, a body image. And now I've got to be referred back out to a mental health counselor rather than an eating disorder counselor. I don't know. For me, I'd rather look at it a little bit higher up rather than so focused down.
The eating disorder is just a manifestation of something much deeper.
Right.
Senator Ward, thank you. So I think we want to, we don't want it to go, I don't want it to go as far as thinking about taking my own life because I have this problem. And we could prevent that by taking a simple step, just, you know, a simple step with something that youth are carrying with them every day into that, to their educational institutions. And again, we have to make sure that if we do this, that it covers all of them. So it would be, because I'm not so sure, and if I'm a student who's recognizing that I'm struggling with food, look, my entire life I've struggled with food. Okay, so like up and down, it becomes very personal for me, but I think about, you know, why, if I'm looking for help, am I going to think about calling like the suicide hotline, or am I going to think about calling for help for an eating disorder? I am so glad, and I think it's one of the best things we've ever done in this country and in this state, is having this national hotline that recognizes there's a problem and we want to remove barriers and get people where they need to be. But the point of this is to not like to intervene before it gets that far. I'm not so sure if I'm struggling with an eating disorder, like, you know, I was thinking the other day, like, you know, geez, I got to call my primary care physician because my blood pressure's up because, you know, I probably sit too much now with all of this work that I do. I'm not, you know, and it's upsetting me, but I'm not thinking about calling. I'm just in that place. So I want to remove a barrier. But so with all of that said, here's where I'm going to go. I do think that we have to find out, you know, if I were to call, or any of us were to call the National Suicide Hotline, and we called because we were concerned about an eating disorder that was, you know, that had brought us to that point. Where would we go? Where would they, I mean, we've got to find out exactly, like, if they got that call, what are they going to do with it? What are the kinds of calls that they're getting, and how do they refer them out? I think we've got to know that. I also think it's worthwhile thinking about, to the point of how much is on the back of a card. We have a precious opportunity here, so let's find out, are there others that should be included now or not? Like, this is just covering one, but there's truth that once you open that door, we're going to get more and more requests. When I worked in a hospital, and you've been in healthcare, Senator Wards, so when I was at Concord Hospital, we had our regular ID, and because we had all of these different codes for if there was somebody dangerous in the building, if there was someone that had escaped, had kidnapped the baby, I could have a list of things. We had a second card that had all the different colors that told us that. And I would prefer not to get to that place because the second card is going to get lost. So should we find out exactly what the scope of 988 is when it comes to all kinds of calls that they get? And should we think now about what else should or should not be included on the back of this card? And my third thing, and I brought it up earlier, is do we want to know, like I think Senator Fenton, you mentioned that you've already looked this up, and there are volunteers that do cover a lot of these different hotlines, but is that the only hotline? Is that the only source? So that's it.
So my only other concern was the fact that the national leading disorder hotline isn't manned 24/7.
I know,
988
they have
is,
that-
right?
and they brought
so,
that up,
yeah, so 988 is.
What is the definition of 9888? What's it called?
I just looked it up. And
'Cause we're talking about we all have a lot of fears, as we're talking about this. It's bringing a lot out. And, if I have an eating disorder, I might not necessarily think that I have a mental health disorder. So if it's saying, for mental health, call this number, it's like, I'm not
Oh,
suicidal.
I
I have
opened
mental
right
health.
up to it here. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. On the right front, I just went to our webpage. Suicide and Crisis Lifeline.
But I might not think an eating disorder is a crisis. That's.
And we want to prevent it from being that's what parents, that's what teachers, that's what your friends want to prevent you from getting to that place.
Right. So again, I think we get to control what's on the back of this card, right? So we can define it any way we want. Mental health services, if you're suffering from anxiety, depression, eating disorder, thoughts of suicide, substance abuse, call this number for help, right? We can put that on the back of the card, and we could go to 988 and it would direct you to any of those things.
Yeah. Just quickly, I went to the 988, and we could spend a lot of time on this, and maybe we need to. 988, is it 988 available for substance use crisis? The Lifeline accepts calls, texts, and chats from anyone who needs support for suicidal, mental health, or substance use crisis. And it goes on. It talks about suicide-related crisis. Wow, look at this list. So, but I do want to bring us back to what Senator Fenton just said. They may not know that they're in that, that they're in that place. Like, what's the best place to call? And I think we want to avoid, in this situation, anyone getting to that place where they would be thinking about harming themselves. And yeah.
Could it be like when you get issued the ID that whatever picture day it is, you're issued the IDs, that the teachers sit down in the auditorium and say, hey, on your card is a number. If you're experiencing any of these, this is the number you call, whether you want to talk to your parents or talk to a specialist, mental health, substance abuse, so on. I think it comes down to education too.
It would be nice to, sorry.
Good.
It would, not just nice to know, but important to know what Senator Gendro brought up. I don't have a daughter in school anymore, so I can't go home and ask her. And these numbers weren't even considered when she was in high school. But when you're issued your student ID, is there a just in time? Like, is there that point where the person who's giving your ID says, all right, this is your ID, this is how you get in and out of the building, and on the backside, you see that there's a number here for the National Suicide Hotline. There's also one for Eating Disorder Hotline. What actually happens? And I don't know who the best person is to ask that question of, either at DOE. I'm just looking for Brian. I was looking for a teacher. She was behind me, but she's gone now. Let's find. Yeah, Teddy can't help us with this. We need a teenager.
We've opened up a can of worms. I think we got to think about it longer.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't want to be so narrow focused, right? Because
Makes sense.
You're on transportation. How many bills did you get for a new license?
It
plate?
was
Like,
every
that
day,
was-
and
you know.
Department of Transportation even said, where does it stop? How much information are we going to put on the back of this driver's license?
I think we've got some yeah. I'm gonna get off.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Adjourned.